Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest Christine Wong, who's a partner at Morrison and Foerster. Christine, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Richard. It's so great to be here.
So, Christine, let me start by asking you've got an incredible career I want to talk about, but maybe we can start by just asking you kind of why you went to law school in the first place.
Why I went to law school? Well, I was an art history major in
Uh-huh.
college,
Uh-huh.
and my one of my sisters went to law school. And when I was declaring my major, my parents, being Asian immigrant, first generation parents, freaked out and said, "Oh my goodness, she's going to be an art history major. What's she going to do?" And my sister said, "Oh, don't worry, she'll go to law school." But I had been, throughout high school, I had been on the debate team. Yes, I was a super dork, and still am. And that, I really enjoy the public speaking and the performative aspects of being a lawyer. And
Mhm.
so it was sort of a natural path for me to take.
Did you know that obviously you became a litigator? Is that something you knew, or when did you figure out that that was a good path for you?
Oh, I knew I was going to be a litigator. Again, because of the public speaking, performative aspects. I really love, doing presentations. I love
Uh-huh.
being in front of a jury.
Uh-huh.
All those are my favorite parts of being a lawyer.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, tell me a little bit, when you graduated from law school, what kind of, how did you start your career? What kind of litigation did you do initially?
Sure. I did the, standard issue, big firm litigation. I started at a big firm in New York.
Hmm.
And it was at a time when I don't think white collar was really a thing. There were
Mm.
some people who did white collar work, but it was always a smaller part of their practice. It isn't sort of the machine that it is now.
Hmm.
And so I did a smattering of different kinds of litigation. And the amazing thing about litigation is no matter how mundane the litigation seems, you really get to know your client.
Mm.
And, I did a matter where it was a reinsurance dispute. I mean, that does not sound exciting,
Yeah.
but I was really interested in it because I got to know my client. And this was a matter where at the end of I think I was at the end of my second year, beginning of my third year,
Mm.
the partner on the matter let me put on a witness at an arbitration hearing,
Hmm.
which it was a big deal. It was fun, and it really sort of whet my appetite for doing more trial work.
Mm. Interesting. Well, at some point you made the switch to go into government. What was the motivation there, or is that something that just kind of landed on your lap?
It was sort of a continuation of this path that I talked about from putting on this witness at this hearing. I was working with different partners, and they all said to me, this it seems like you like that sort of work, you like trial
Mm.
work,
Mm.
and you'd get so much experience if you go to the U.S. Attorney's office, and so I applied, and I was lucky enough to get in.
Wow. And what was that like? Tell me about that experience.
Amazing. It's the best job I think any young litigator can have.
Hmm.
My first 8 months, I did three trials,
Wow.
which granted was a bit unusual. Most people did, one trial a year, especially in that first year, but I was lucky enough to do three in my first year. And at the SDNY, you do your first three trials, you have a grown-up sit with you, like a more experienced AUSA, and they make sure that you don't stick your finger in the light socket. They don't actually put on witnesses or anything, they just sit with you. But after your first three, you can go off and do trials on your own.
Mm.
And because I had done three in such quick succession, then my colleagues were coming to me and saying, "Oh, hey, can you do this trial with me? Because you've done three." And so I was able to collect more experience in that way. And it
Wow.
was really, really fun.
So you're trying cases against partners who are probably 10, 20 years older than you, basically, aren't you, on the other side?
Yeah, that's right. And there's something really wonderful about being young in that position. You're given all this responsibility and you really have to own your matters. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges for associates in big firms,
Mm.
that they work on matters that have a lot of other people above them. And it's hard to see where you make a difference.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard to own decisions on a matter because you're not the one making the decisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But advice that I always give young associates is if you can demonstrate ownership, that you are taking this case and you're thinking about it, you're noodling on it
Mm,
outside of work hours or even in work hours, but you're really thinking hard about it,
mm.
those efforts are really noticed and are incorporated into the advice we give to our clients.
Now, when you joined the government, were you thinking you were going to be a career government lawyer? Were you thinking you would just do it for a couple of years? What was your thinking at that time?
Well, I started at the SDNY, and the SDNY is not a place where most people spend, there are very few lifers there. And I
Okay.
think it's for a good reason. I think being an AUSA is a job that requires fire in the belly.
Mm,
And it's intense. You learn so much from it. I think my years at the SCNY are, they're like dog years. Like 1 year is like 7 years
mm,
anywhere else. And then I think it's time to move on and make room for other people to have that experience,
hmm.
which is how I approached it.
Yeah, right. So did you know that you wanted to go back? And I see you went back to private practice. Is that something you kind of were always thinking about, or again, or did that opportunity just kind of present itself?
Again, that is it is an SDNY thing. Most people go back to private practice. You sort of know that's what you're going to do.
Mm,
So I had that in mind. I mean, we had moved to San Francisco. I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office out here, but I sort of kept that ethos with me. And I knew at some point it would be time. And so it came time, and I started thinking about where I wanted to go next.
And so when you resumed to private practice, did you kind of pick up where you left off, or did you kind of did things change a little bit than when you had left the first time around?
I did a little more white collar work when I came out of the government, and but I was sort of back in regular civil litigation.
Was it hard kind of switching sides again instead of always being the plaintiff, now sometimes being the defendant, and maybe not as many trials? Like, was the pace a little different?
The pace was different, although in my first year back in private practice, I did a trial.
Okay.
Uh, and that's, making good use of my, former AUSA and trial experience,
Yeah,
getting back
yeah,
in the saddle
yeah.
there.
Was it a little slow going back to private practice, or did you kind of like snap right back and do it quickly?
I think I snapped back pretty quickly. It was funny. I remember when I was thinking about going back to private practice, I was talking to Denny, my husband, and I was like,
Mhm.
"Is that insane? What am I doing?" But then it's funny. You get right back into it, and especially the second time around. After I went in house and came to MoFo, that felt very natural and easy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, before we get to that, let's talk a little about your in-house because again, it's really interesting. You were private practice, government, and then you went in-house. Is that something you wanted to try?
When I look back at my career, I mean, I wish I could construct a story where I was like, oh, I knew what I was going to do at every path of the way, and I knew it was going to get me here. And there are people like that, and I really admire people who have like a 5-year plan and they
Yeah,
execute on it.
yeah.
Was very much not me.
Uh-huh.
Opportunities fell in my lap or people told me about them, and I said, oh, that sounds really interesting. It sounds like something I haven't done before. I could learn a lot from it.
Huh.
And that's exactly what happened with in-house. So I was at my firm coming out of government, and a good friend from the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York had been doing work as outside counsel for the company
Uh-huh.
and said, hey, they're looking to build out a compliance program. They're looking for someone who was a former AUSA.
Hmm.
They want someone who has investigative chops. And I said, well, that's me. I'd never, of course, built out a compliance program before, but I said, well, I used to catch criminals, so I should be able to help prevent criminals within a company. And I applied for the job and I got it.
That's
And it
so
was really
interesting.
an incredible experience.
Yeah. Well, what was it like? How did you enjoy it? How was it different? What did you like about it?
What I really liked about it, so I ran the compliance program for all group companies outside of Japan. This was
Uh-huh.
a Japanese-based company.
Uh-huh.
And the most fun thing about it was a very international position. So my
Mm.
team was based in London, Munich, Tokyo, Singapore. We had a guy in China. It really was a global group. And I was the only person in the US besides the person I reported to.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, that meant that our team meetings were at 6 a.m. Once a week. So that's not fun. But it was really interesting, especially from an American perspective, where we can be so insular in a way because we are so dominant in the world market. We don't really need to look anywhere else.
Yeah.
This was really a way, this was really, it really opened my world, both professionally and personally.
Interesting.
I was learning from my team about things going on around the world.
Mm.
I was following politics in Spain because
Mm.
sometimes politics impact, how an investigation turns out. I was
Mm.
following politics in Romania. I mean,
Mm.
it really opened my world in the sense, and in a deeper way than just reading the newspaper.
Yeah, yeah,
And on a personal level, I was doing so much more international travel.
yeah, I bet.
And we realized at the time, like, oh, our kids are old enough to actually travel internationally. And we started taking them on international trips as well. So it really, I can't emphasize enough how it really opened my world.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of frequent flyer miles.
There were a lot of frequent flyer miles. That is true.
Well, then what made you decide to go back to private practice? Now you've kind of done it all. Was it, again, did that just land on your lap, or you had some former colleagues at MoFo maybe that lured you over?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So what I learned from in-house, and I really like being in-house. I think it's challenging in a very different way than it is being at a firm. But what I did learn is so much of when you get a really sophisticated matter,
Mm.
you have to turn to outside counsel because you
Mm.
you just don't have the resources to do it, and you're overseeing too many matters. And I frankly missed appearing in court. I missed being the person before the regulator. Um, I I missed those aspects of it. And when I was in-house, I tried to replicate those experiences in-house. Like when I did our presentations to the board, I thought of that as an appellate argument because you
Uh-huh,
get
uh-huh.
sort of peppered with questions in the same way that
Yeah,
you do
right.
before an appeals court. When I had to do my, you know, speeches before all the salespeople at a big sales kickoff, I thought of it as a jury address. These are people I
Mm.
need to convince
Mm.
about the story that I'm telling.
Mm.
And then I realized, maybe I should just go back to a firm. And MoFo is my former company's primary outside counsel.
Mm.
And I'd made a lot of friends there, worked with a lot of people there, and got to know the firm very well. And so it was a natural place for me to go.
So what kind of practice do you have now? Is it mostly white collar, mostly civil litigation? How has it kind of evolved since returning?
It's mostly white collar investigations work. I do
Uh-huh.
do some civil litigation, but I would say it's probably, well, right now it's weighted, I would say 50-50.
Uh-huh.
But usually I would say it's 75 white collar investigations, 25 civil litigation.
And have you had a chance to go to trial since going back to
I
private practice?
have. I
Oh.
have. I went to trial last year
Uh-huh.
on a white collar matter.
Yeah, right. Well, now that you've done private practice, government, in-house, is there anything left that you could do? Would you ever go back in-house? Would you ever pick up another one of the other options?
Well, I haven't been a judge yet.
Right, of course. Or a professor. There's a professor too.
Well, actually, I've taught a couple times.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Is
Uh, Look, I really love what I'm doing right now, and I
Mhm.
love being at MoFo.
Yeah,
But it's all about the experience, right? If
yeah, yeah,
something walks in the door and it's something I haven't done before, or something I think I would learn a lot from.
yeah, yeah. That's really cool. Well, Christine, I really appreciate your taking the time. It's been a wonderful chatting with you. When I interviewed Denny, he told me you must interview Christine. So he was obviously right.
Well, thank you so much for squeezing me in.
This is Richard Hsu and Christine Wong. Thanks.